Hello everyone and welcome to SUNUP. I'm Lyndall Stout. We join you today from the cafe at the Noble County Livestock Auction at Perry. This time of year we like to sit down and look back at the year that has just passed, as well as look ahead at some of the things that we can expect in the new year. Joining us today are our good friends Larry Sanders, Ag Policy Specialist, Kim Anderson, our Grain Marketing Specialist, and Derrel Peel, our Livestock Marketing Specialist. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us today. And as we think back of what 2017 has brought us, it's been an interesting year, hasn't it? On a lot of fronts. Larry, let's just kick it off hearing a little perspective from you.
Well, it really has been a remarkable year. We had a new administration come in. They have come in at a time where the economy was doing relatively well, and it's been steady over the year as to how it's grown and improved. The unemployment rate's gone down, inflation has stayed low, our economic growth has been relatively stable, and it's a good general economy for other markets to take advantage of.
And as we look back at the year in terms of grain prices, what did you see and what are your thoughts? Of course, we talked every week, but when you look at the year as a whole, what are the takeaways?
Well, if you look at the year as a whole and coming into the year, and let's talk about the stocks to use ratio. For the grains, they're essentially in the tank and they stayed there. The stocks to use ratio for wheat coming in January was 53% for the United States. In other words, we had half a year's crop in the bin. For the world, it was 34%. Now you can compare those to the averages, and that's good news because the U.S. average is 44 and the world is 36. So you had the world slightly below average and the U.S. above average. We got into harvest. Those numbers held out pretty close. For the old crop, the U.S. was at 53%, but for the new crop, it was 44%, which was right at the average. We had prices in the $3.50 range in January, February, March. It got up, almost kissed $5 on January the 5th, and then they started down. And they started down as the world realized that the U.S. wheat crop was a relatively low protein, good test weight, good milling yields, but very low protein. And then as the harvest went around the world established another record or near record with production. You had Russia, look at over a 3 billion bushel crop there. The protein for that Russian crop averaged 12.4%. They had exportable wheat and they took over the export market. We started 16 with Russia being the #1 exporter in the world for the first time ever, and they continued that and increased their exports over the U.S. exports and other world country exports. And essentially, with that high protein wheat, that's essentially the only place you can get protein. Canada's crop came in smaller than expected, protein a little lower than expected. Right now, if you look at the crops, the world's short of protein. Same thing on corn. We came in, started the year with below average stocks to use ratio in the U.S., right at average world. You get into the August harvest and those held right at average for the U.S. at 16, the world at 22%, the U.S. average was 12. And corn prices with above average stocks to use ratio, well above average stocks, corn prices remained relatively low. Soybeans, that was the good news. Soybean prices, protein, the world is short of protein, and cotton was the other good news. With a record cotton crop, prices actually increased, and that was good. Canola prices held about steady throughout the year.
A good overview there. How about the livestock markets, Derrel?
You know, 2017 started with the cattle industry, a fair amount of uncertainty. 2016 was a big transition year. We saw the first significant increases in beef production in some time. We had horrible lows in the fall of 2016 as the market kind of came to grips with the idea of being in a growing supply situation. And so there was a lot of uncertainty coming into 2017. Certain things continued. We did see favorable trade patterns continue from 2016 into 2017, with imports being down, beef exports increasing. There was definitely a lot of uncertainty to begin with. The year began to look pretty favorable quite early in the year, with things looking stronger than expected. We did see in 2017 a continuation of favorable trade patterns. Beef imports were down in 2016. Exports began to increase. That continued in 2017, particularly early in the year. As we moved through the year, imports actually were higher in the last part of the year on a month-over-month basis, but ended up close to year-earlier levels. At the same time, exports continued to expand. So, and of course, what developed as we went through the year was not only was that export demand component very strong, but domestic demand stayed very strong. So despite the fact that we had growing beef production and increased supplies of pork and poultry, beef prices at the wholesale and retail levels remained very strong through the year.
And Larry, in your opinion, the things that they just talked about, this overview of the year, does that play into what we're seeing overall economically?
Very much so, especially the trade issues, because we're right at the beginning of some very serious questions that have to be answered about our participation in world trade and how tax reform is going to affect business decisions in the future. And so we're in a very good place right now market-wise, but there's lots of questions that are on the table.
Of course. We'll continue our discussion and look at where we are as we wind down the year in just a moment. But first, we want to check in with our friends at the Mesonet. Here's the Mesonet Weather Report.
"2017 was an important year for Mesonet and Fire. A new OK Fire website came online. The new site offers some great new features to help prescribe fire and wildfire control. The website includes regional views for the primary selected Mesonet site. We selected Bernieville in south central Oklahoma. The top map shows relative humidity and wind direction. The bottom map shows burning index. Next to the regional maps are specific weather and fire danger conditions. You can also choose a second site. Here we chose Medill. There was a good contrast in fire danger from high at Bernieville to low at Medill. Down the page are forecast graphs of wind speed and relative humidity for the next 12 hours. The web page will work on your phone, but you will need to zoom out and in to change Mesonet sites. On your phone, you'll also need to go through your browser. The mobile Mesonet site will come up if you search on Mesonet in your browser. On the mobile Mesonet page, scroll to the bottom of the page and select Full Site. That will take you to the Mesonet full site. Select Fire Management on the top gray menu bar and the new OK Fire page will come up. Next, use Add to Home Screen so you'll have an app-like icon that opens the OK Fire webpage. When you click on that icon, the OK Fire webpage will open and update with the latest information for the site or sites selected. Now you have a new tool for fire management or wildfire control. Happy New Year to you and your family.
We are talking now about some of the food trends you might see in the new year with Andrea Graves, who is a business planning and marketing specialist here at the Food and Ag Products Center. Andrea, this is always neat to talk about some of the things we might see in the year ahead, and it's always a little different. What kind of things are you keeping track of for 2018?
There's lots of things coming up for 2018. One of them is robotics, believe it or not. This is more for the larger companies, but you know, we all have employees that, you know, sometimes, you know, get sick, they call in, or, you know, there's just not a big range of people that want to come work at for the food industry. So these factories are looking for more people or more things that will help them with that, so they don't have to worry about employees.
So in terms of the actual food processing part of things, we'll see more automation and sophisticated robots doing that.
Correct, as well as drone delivery. We've been talking about drone delivery, and that's also part of that kind of robotics as well. So who knows, you might get something delivered to you here sometime soon.
That was made by a robot, delivered by a drone.
Possibly, yes.
In terms of consumers, what kind of things are they interested in and trends in terms of food?
Well, the consumers really have a demand now for simple, and that could mean a lot of different things. It could mean everything from like a mushroom, like from J&M Farms, something that doesn't have a lot of ingredients, or it also could mean convenience or simplicity. We've got organic syrup from Griffin's, where they've taken out some of the ingredients as far as put in simple sugar instead of corn syrup and some other things. So they're wanting easy, they're wanting simple, but they want to be involved just a little bit in their food production.
Okay. How do you think some of these trends that you've mentioned, and no doubt there will be a complete list that we can keep track of, but how do you think these will affect the food industry in Oklahoma specifically, and some of the work that you and your team do here?
Well, we always want to be on trend because we want them to sell more and be a little bit ahead of things. I recommend anybody who's in the food industry to take a look at some of the industry magazines that are out there, and you can often get free subscriptions, and they're on the ball with it. And FAPSI, we try to put out things on social media and our publications as well, so that everybody can be in the loop and make sure they're not behind.
And for average folks too, who are interested in their food and paying more attention to those ingredients, like you mentioned, they can engage with this content as well.
Yes. If they have questions that they don't have the answers to, they can contact us or also some of these publications as well.
And seek out the facts.
Definitely.
Thanks a lot, Andrea. It's always great to hear about the trends that are coming in the year ahead, and we wish you a happy new year.
Well, thank you. You too.
And for a complete list of the food trends that are coming in 2018, just go to our website, SUNUP.okstate.edu. We're continuing our discussion now, and we want to look at where we are as we wind down 2017. Kim, what's the status right now with the markets?
Well, if you look at wheat, it's not in good positions. The stocks-to-use ratios for the U.S. and the world are near average, which is good news. However, that product we got in the bin is relatively low quality, like we talked about, low protein. But the low protein gives the producer some opportunities for the upcoming crop. The market, like I said, ended up the year short of protein. And so what they're going to look for in the next year is protein. You got corn stocks, that U.S. average stocks-to-use ratio, 12%. The U.S. is at 17 now. The world's 20% stocks-to-use average, they're at 19%. So you've got the world, the U.S. in above average, the world right at average. I think that's good news for corn. I think corn can recover their price this next year if we have a little smaller crop. Soybeans, protein, they're in the driver's seat. And you look at the way we ended the year, the world slightly above average, the U.S. above average on the stocks-to-use ratio. So we've got adequate stocks of protein. However, the world still wants that protein. Cotton prices have been increasing coming into starting this next year, and that is good news. Canola just moving along, a relatively large canola crop. We ended up the year with a lot of canola in the bin, and canola price is relatively low.
And Derrel, as 2017 winds down, your thoughts?
Well, we ended 2017 on a very strong note for cattle and beef markets. We did see an increase in production. We're going to end up with around 3.5% more beef this year. And yet, despite that, cattle and beef prices are above where they were this time last year. Again, demand has been the key, and I think we're carrying some momentum forward as we look to the next year. We'll continue this process. 2018 will largely be a continuation of that. But we have a lot of momentum going for us. The supply challenges will continue to be there. One of the good things is that while we've had an increase in cattle slaughter as expected, nearly 6% more cattle slaughtered, carcass weights have been lower to offset part of that, sort of moderating the increase in beef production. As long as that continues, that also helps on the supply side.
And Larry, let's touch base again on these trade agreements, the climate in Washington, and of course the economy being on autopilot. Give us your take on all of that as we wind down.
Well, I think what's gotten the headlines has been the trade issues. We pulled out of the Pacific Trade Agreement, but there's been no short-term impact with that. NAFTA is being renegotiated, and it's kind of got people in agriculture nervous about how that might go, because if it does get renegotiated, we could possibly lose some in agriculture. The tax issue has by far gotten the most headlines, and there's the biggest cause for concern. Normally, when an economy decides to cut spending or reduce taxes, it's when we are in a serious economic situation. Right now, our economy is doing very well, and so it's economically doesn't make sense to do that. Politically, it makes good sense. So we're going to see how that plays out. The Fed is going to fight what the administration does, because they're beginning to be concerned about an increase in inflation, so they're going to be continuing to raise interest rates. So that's kind of the precipice we're at as we move into 2018.
Okay, great perspective. We'll continue our discussion and look at kind of the forecast of trends as we move into the new year in just a moment. But first, let's hear from Glenn Selk. Here's Cow-Calf Corner.
Most cow-calf producers would certainly prefer to have the cows calve during the daylight hours, when they're more likely to see if a cow or heifer needs some assistance. Plus the fact that if those calves are born during daylight, the chances are that they'll warm up a little bit better, be a little more active, perhaps get up and nurse the cow a little sooner. Encouraging more cows to calve during daylight hours can be done with a management technique called nighttime feeding. Most recently, some data out of Kansas State University, published back in 2002. Over a 5-year period of time, they kept track of when cows actually delivered calves, when those cows were fed between 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. in the evening. And basically what they found was that about 34% of them calved in the 4-hour time frame between 6 a.m. and 10 a.m., 21% between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m., and then another nearly 30% of the cows calved between 2 p.m. and 6 p.m. So when you add that all up, that's over 85% of the cows that calve between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. or during the daylight hours. So I think that producers that have spring calving operations want to try to take advantage of this management practice if at all possible, and by changing their feeding pattern when they put out the supplement to late in the day, around dusk, if at all possible. In this way, it seems to influence when these cows actually go into labor and have the calves. We'll have a higher percentage of them calving during daylight hours, when we can provide help if necessary, and I think help get that calf off to a little better start. We certainly hope that this will help you through this upcoming calving season, and we'll look forward to visiting with you again next week on SUNUP's Cow-Calf Corner.
Let's kind of wind things down now by looking ahead to 2018. Derrel, your thoughts with cattle markets?
Well, again, we're carrying some momentum out of 2017. I think 2018 will be a continuation of the general picture. We kind of know what supply is going to do. We're going to have more cattle. We're still expanding the herd through 2017 at least. So we're going to have more cattle, more feeder cattle in the pipeline. Feedlot inventories will probably continue to grow, and certainly beef production will continue to grow in 2018. So we'll have those supply challenges. 2017 proved that doesn't necessarily have to be a big problem, but it really is going to put the spotlight on demand as we go forward. So, we're going to be looking at domestic demand as well as the international demand to continue. If that happens, overall, I guess my price expectation would be that we will probably see rather minimal erosion of prices. I do expect prices to drop somewhat, perhaps not so much in the first part of the year, but as we go through the year and towards the second half of the year, we'll see a bit more supply pressure. But the risk here is that demand factor. If demand falters at all, then that supply pressure is going to be a bigger impact, and we could see more pressure on prices. So again, we kind of know what supply is going to do, but we're really keeping an eye on demand. And because of that, I think most of the potential for a shock to the beef industry is going to come from those external factors. And so, as we think about what might happen to trade agreements and so on, that could be a big impact, right, Larry?
There's no doubt about it. We've been at the table with NAFTA now for a couple of months, whether or not we're going to renegotiate it. And if the president decides to walk away from NAFTA, I think ag is going to have some downside risk on that. What's been likely is that the first half of 2018 is going to be a mirror image economically of this year, 2017. Second half of the year, all bets are off, I think. What we haven't talked about is, wait for it, we're going to possibly vote on a new farm bill. Now, the farm organizations, the commodity groups, have been tied in with the House Ag and Senate Ag committees, and they've pretty much got locked in what they want, and we're going to see that rolled out in the spring and possibly begin to be seriously discussed in Congress in the summertime. And it's basically going to be maintain what we've got with some changes in cotton and changes in dairy perhaps. The tax reform, if that gets passed, probably won't impact us immediately, but down the road it's going to have some repercussions that we could regret.
Okay. Your thoughts, Kim?
Well, let's start with what the market's offering for new crop. For new crop wheat, about $3.60 a bushel. New crop corn, $3.30. New crop milo, $3.10. Beans, $9. Canola, $6.50. I think what we can say here is that, Larry, Luther Tweeden taught me back in the mid-'80s, policy comes and policy goes, but weather's going to determine price. I think the big concern right now is the 90-day outlook is for below average precipitation. The drought is building in the Oklahoma and the Plains area. I think that's a concern. If you look at wheat acres are going down. The odds are harvested acres percentage will be down, especially if we're dry. We're going to roll into corn, we're going to roll into cotton, we're going to roll into beans. That's going to impact those prices. I think if you look around the cotton acreage with the current cotton prices, you're going to see a lot more cotton acres as we come into next year. A lot more cotton acres with some right weather. You're going to have lower cotton prices. Soybeans, if we can have protein in wheat, roll into some of this acreage into soybeans, which has got a favorable price relative to corn and to wheat and to canola, then we're going to build that protein. I think our wheat price, if we got protein in it, is going to be really, I think it can be close to $5 at harvest if we can get protein in test weight, but we better sell it early because we'll have those bigger crops. We got some changes going on in Oklahoma, and we got changes going in crops in the United States. The U.S. overall is rolling out of wheat because we've got the former Soviet Union countries, we've got Eastern European countries that have new technology, better management, better equipment, and they're taking over the export market in that part of the world. So we're going to see some big changes, and they're starting right now. We're going to see some big changes in the way production and crops are produced in the United States and which crops are produced.
With all this in mind, kind of a final thought for producers in Oklahoma with this kind of atmosphere moving into the new year. What's the takeaway for them going into the new year?
I think from a cattle and beef perspective, you have to be aware of the risks that are out there. You know, again, we've got a bigger supply situation. I didn't mention this before, but not only is beef going to be at a record level next year, when you add increased pork and poultry to that, we're probably going to see record total meat production. So those trade risks really become apparent in terms of our ability to move some of that increased production offshore. And again, the domestic demand, so continuation of the strong macro economy in the U.S. Is very, very important. So producers really need to, the overall situation as it stands today probably looks generally favorable, but there is definitely downside risk that we need to keep in mind.
Larry, your takeaway advice for producers?
Well, if you're going to need loans, get them sooner rather than later, locked in. Be educating your bankers if you're going to be thinking about changing crop mixes, that make sure they're on board, because interest rates are definitely going to go up.
And Kim?
I've said most things negative about wheat. Wheat will survive. We've got to have bread. And the producers that survive are those producers that don't have that average 32 bushels per acre. It's going to be those producers that average 45, 50, 55, and 60 bushels per acre. The producers that manage, that put down and raise that crop right and get a quality product, they're going to have the export market, they're going to have the domestic market, they're going to have price, and they will make a profit.
Okay, great discussion today, gentlemen. Thank you very much. Look forward to talking more in 2018 and wish you and your families a very happy new year.
Happy New Year to you.
And thanks to you, all of our viewers, for joining us today, and happy new year to you as well. And we'll see you next week on SUNUP.